So Fiona, you were the production designer of the multi-BAFTA nominated and Golden Globe Award winning film, The Favorite. This is a really interesting movie because it's a period film, and it takes place during a time that we've seen in a lot of movies before. But it's also a film from Yorgos Lanthimos, who has a very distinctive vision. So just talk a little bit about, I guess, what the initial sort of ideas from him were, and what your initial ideas were as well.
Yeah, basically, when I received the script, I feel like, it was so evident from the script that the tone was going to be something quite different, that it wasn't your kind of classic biopic or anything like that. It was immediately playful, immediately anachronistic. There are so many things on the page, like, the lines that they speak that I just knew they wouldn't have said that, that didn't exist. So already I knew that where there was like a freedom within it. And I met with Yorgos. It was like it was a meeting with Yorgos and the producers to sort of, basically I tap danced to get the job. And I put together references, and from memory, like, Yorgos had very little to say. He looked at my references. I spoke way too much. I moved my hands far. I was too expressive, and he was just kind of sitting there taking it in. But in those images, I think I happened to have impulses that he responded to. And so in many ways, to be really honest, our process was very simple, because I sort of had landed on a look that he, I think, had instinctively felt was right. So we just kind of checked in with each other, but it was it was a really light process, actually. Like, we just were off and running.
Mm-hmm. Those visual references that you had, I mean, could you just dive in a little bit more into just some examples of that?
Yeah, I remember finding, and I won't remember who the artist is, but there was a series of architectural drawings that were actually of Hampton Court and some of the locations, not that we necessarily used, but that we looked at. And they were close to period, they were out of period, but they were basically these fantastic, very simple line drawings and with watercolor. And they showed scale and how lightly dressed and empty the rooms really were at that time, and also the scale, how you'd have an enormous bed or an enormous canopied throne sitting in a room with like three other tiny little objects. And that was a really big clue for me that this isn't Victorian, it's not lace everywhere, it's not loads of furnishings, it's actually it was emptier, and the idea of having figures rattling around in those vast spaces just felt right. And so there were those drawings, and then there was a lot of contemporary photography that just had an atmosphere that landed. And so I didn't even really look at anything that was period correct at all, because I had no idea. I don't have a great historical architectural knowledge, so I knew that would come later. It was more about what was resonating just as an impulse. Yeah.
Dive a little bit more into, I guess, sort of the in terms of emotion, thematic, from the point of view of like the characters in the movie. Because the really interesting thing about this as well is that it has a very modern sensibility in the way that it portrays, female dynamics, and female dynamics with men as well. Talk a little bit about, did that affect your work as well?
I think the main thing that we looked at and we sort of enjoyed was how Anne was feeling, really, like in terms of how she inhabited her spaces. So Anne's unwell for a lot of the film. So what does that do? She's sort of stuck there as well. She can't move. So she's sort of hobbling around. And so what does that do? We didn't want to create an environment that was perfect. There's something about that room. There are moments where the bed is unmade, it's undone, there's stuff on the floor, there's rabbits around, there was an imperfection to her world that we really focused on. And then we also did a lot of, we literally did a chart that had her mood, and also her kind of how she was feeling in terms of her relationships, and then we reflected that in, you know, were the flowers really buoyant, or did suddenly things get really stripped back? So we sort of charted that kind of stuff in subtle ways. But my main thing was, yeah, just making sure that the spaces felt, particularly her environment, although we did do this with the Great Hall as well, just that they felt lived in, that they were alive, that it was, you know, everything moved, you know, like you could move every single chair, like it wasn't set, it was mobile, you know. Yeah.
Right. And as well, I mean, you don't shy away from the, for lack of a better term, grossness of the time. I mean, you have this very regal setting, but then you also have everything that's, you know, the lower depths, if you will, of all the housekeepers and the servants and all of that. And so, just talk a bit about showing that that disparity.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I really enjoyed that I probably wouldn't have assumed I would have done, like it was sort of, it came through finding locations, was I really loved that the servants' quarters were whitewashed. So there was something very bright about those. And then you went upstairs where you would normally think that that would be the airy, bright environment, was actually dark. And so I really enjoyed that shift, you know, the palette shift and how the textural shift as well. So upstairs was shiny, downstairs was matte, you know, there were things like that. But yeah, I think that was one of the things that I remember reading, like enjoying in the script, was the fact that, you know, there was constantly someone, I mean, she vomits, I don't know how many times, and she vomits in beautiful vases, you know, and all of our lovely we had beautiful medical equipment, you know, and we had leeches. We actually had real leeches on set, you know, and like things like that, you know, I think those contrasts are really, they were really fun to play with. Yeah.
Was there a specific color palette that you were wanting to work with, that maybe you know, you and the costume designer and, you know, the other creatives were trying to you know, convey in the film?
Yeah, I mean, what we did was we stripped out, because we were working in a location that came with, you know, wooden floors, and we had wood paneling. They were the main things that were in the location. I realized that and I also knew, I spoke very early to Sandy Powell, the costume designer, and Yorgos, and they had decided that they were going to be really monochromatic with the costumes. And so I realized quite quickly that I had to almost create a bridge between that kind of stylized costuming and an existing location that we were, you know, modifying, but that was standing. And so we stripped out all color, all the colors that we used, all the drapery, all the furnishings, it's all gold. We only used variations on gold. And then we had blue and white china. And then pretty much that was it, to be honest. I mean, like, so when you look at the frame, it's quite concise in terms of color. Like we had lots of color in things like flowers, and we had lots of lovely macaroons and food. But so they were almost like pin pricks of color, when in reality, the palette it was deliberately contained. And part of the reason was also that we knew that after camera tests that we were going to have these incredible lenses where you get so much information in a frame that I didn't want to go crazy. Like I didn't want it to be overwhelming. I want it to actually be quite concise, you know.
I was surprised to see that you guys made this for about $15 million, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Very much money.
how did that affect your work? I mean, how do you, when you're mounting a very ambitious production like this, how does that affect your work? How do you work
Well,
around that?
yeah, I mean, I think probably the thing that I was most anxious about was creating a sense of like genuine beauty and luxury, and like everything needed to be the finest version, you know. It's because it had to believably be for a queen. It's like the pinnacle. And so what we did was we effectively created like an asset list. So we walked into Hatfield House, we looked at it, we said, okay, so this is what really works for us. This is what doesn't work. You can't tell the story here the way that it currently is. These are the things we need. And then I remember having our art directors, and we would walk around and look at the detailing, and we chose like, for example, the black and white tiles that you see in the Great Hall, we then added black and white tiles into other sets, you know, so that it felt like our work was an extension. So we were taking the screen value of Hatfield and growing it as much as we could. So taking advantage of the beautiful parts of Hatfield. And it's the same with Hampton Court. We did that. So that was, you know, probably the smartest decision, was trying to work out, like, you know, we built the secret passage, but we built sections of Sarah's room, but copying the joinery of the house, so that when you come in and out of those rooms, it all feels like a continuum. It doesn't feel like, oh, here's a set build, you know. And the other thing we did that I'm really pleased with, that, you know, I remember sort of we were kind of debating, was we actually paid a lot of attention to small details. So we had, I mean, the bed wasn't a small detail, but we handmade the bed. We had glassware handmade. You know, because we knew we were coming in close, we wanted these things to be really beautiful, so that it felt, yeah, that there was attention to the really fine details that were close, just as much as it was in the wide scene. Yeah, wide shot.
Excuse me. Working with Yorgos Lanthimos, what was that collaboration like?
Oh, Yorgos was I think he's very clear. And so I knew his concerns very early on. And his concerns primarily were how we were lighting the film with candles and how we facilitated that as an art department. He was very concerned with movement. I knew that they were going to roam with that camera. And so therefore I couldn't impede on that with saying, oh, you know, but I must have this thing here, you know, like he wanted to have a fluidity. So they were his primary notes to me, to be honest. And he was incredibly hands off. Like, he just wanted me to do my job, like just get on with it. And I remember he moved one sofa once, and that was about it. Like, he just was he would come in and just do the work. And yeah, he's great. I mean, he's a man of few words, sort of, but I loved working with him. He's very trusting. I got to do my thing, and I got to run with it, and I'm so grateful for that.
Speaking of those candles, was that something you had to work out with the DP, or tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, candle logistics are something that I'm very good at now. So we had approximately, according to my prop master, Muffin Green, we had approximately 80,000 candles that were burnt through the course of the film. We had 2 candle guys full-time who were, like, you know, cutting them to size, pre-drilling them so they could just pop them on, you know, all of that. So it was all like go, go, go. And the big thing was, of course, wax. Like, you just don't think about wax management, but wax management is a really big deal, particularly in, you know, like an incredible place, like, well, the environments that we're in. So, yeah, we had to, the thing that was kind of, it was sort of tricky, was creating a way to justify that many candles, because in reality, they wouldn't have had that many candles. Like, they just wouldn't have. And so we had to find, you know, we had to be really compositional about how we were putting them in a frame. So, I mean, we did lots of, you know, tiering and making sure that it all kind of looked compositional, not chaotic, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've learned a lot. As I said at the top, this has been nominated for multiple BAFTAs, just this morning, as a matter of fact. You were one of the nominees. You've also gotten an Art Directors Guild nomination for your work earlier this week. What does that recognition mean to you?
Do you know what? What it means, in all honesty, is I have looked at the people that I'm nominated with for years, and I cannot believe that my name is sitting alongside them. I just can't. I mean, I'm so pleased. I'm just completely, I'm quite moved by it. It's really special for me. And it's also, there is so much good feeling about that film for me. Like, we had such a wonderful time. My crew were sending me messages saying it was the happiest time they had on a film. So for it to be something that we all feel so connected to, I am really grateful. I'm really grateful for it. Yeah.
Well, Fiona, congratulations again on not just the nominations, but on your work. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good one.